My name is Archana Vemulapalli. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Washington, D.C. Citizen experience and what citizens get is the most important thing. What is their experience like? Are we giving them the right experience? If we are, they're going to stay. If not, they're going to move to another city or another county or another state where they get a better experience. I can't deploy technology for technology's sake. But is that technology helping me deliver services quicker, faster, better? We have call centers that we manage, right? If I can leverage a skills environment to actually look at the logs, see what people report about, learn about it, and now improve service where you as a resident say, hey, guess what? I called like 5 times before, now I only call once, and within 24 hours, someone takes care of it. That's value, right? So for us, it's leveraging some of these amazing trends that are coming out there, but tying them to very specific outcomes, because we have to show that success story. The idea of Box was to not just collaborate and share documents. People have always been doing that traditionally through painfully long email exchanges that everyone had, right? But it's the idea that here's a tool that starts getting you to think more collaboratively about information, makes us collaborate more real time. And then more importantly for us, the reason it's of value is we wanted to get intelligence out of the data we had. There's so much of information sitting out there. We need to get a handle on what is it that we collect. And when it's disparate, we don't know. And so for us, it was just helping, sort of pull it into that. And what really appealed to us was also the commitment from Box's leadership, right? Both in terms of the roadmap and the product. So for us, it's one, is it a great product that meets our needs, but also is the organization heading in the direction we want to go? And so I think for both, it worked out really well.
Hello and welcome to today's webcast, Embracing the Future of Work with the Content Cloud. I'm your host, George Jackson. With projects becoming more cooperative, organizations require new technology to provide services that meet the evolving expectations of both their workforce and the broader public. Agencies are attempting to keep up by using a patchwork of legacy content systems and modern tools, and trying to strike the balance between external stakeholders' expectations and familiar ways of working. However, these methods fail to adapt to change and often end up siloing information. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. One, I want to thank our event partner, Box, for sponsoring today's important conversation. Two, be sure to check out our Event Resource Center. That's in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And three, we encourage you to share your own perspectives and questions via our interactive chat. We hope you'll contribute to the conversation about how to tackle some of the government's most complicated problems.
This is a file. Maybe it's a customer contract that helps you close a deal, a budget spreadsheet to manage your supply chain, or a video that tells your story, like this one. It gets passed around a network of people who view and edit it throughout the day. This file is important for your business, but it's so much more than meets the eye. In fact, this single piece of content, a container for your most important data, holds the key to your success. It contains the make or break financial results within the spreadsheet, the new product designs that will drive next year's growth, the sensitive customer information in the research report. It's the critical, your business depends on it data. Depending on how you use it, this content can either help you solve your customers' problems, or, if you ignore it, hold you back. So we're here to help. First, we keep your information safe and compliant. As content flows in, out, and across your business, a proactive approach to security gives you total peace of mind. Then, we let everyone work together easily and move faster. Teams both inside and outside your company stay on the same page. Manual work that was trapped in silos becomes automated and collaborative. Processes shrink from days to minutes. We also help your apps talk to one another and let content flow across each one. From sales and finance to HR and legal, every team can use Box to bring the files that matter to them into the tools they already use. That way, you keep your people happy by letting them work the way they want. We do it all on a single platform. Box is how deals get signed, how brands are built, how innovation is scaled. We're trusted by the world's best organizations, and we'll change the way you run yours. Box. Simplify how you work.
Hi, everyone. If you're just tuning in, I'm still George Jackson. You're watching Embracing the Future of Work with the Content Cloud. I'm here with Major Brian Allibone, Director of Innovation for the 55th Wing of the U.S. Air Force, Taka Ariga, Chief Data Scientist at the Government Accountability Office, and Rick Krieger, Chief Information Officer at the Department of Labor. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for being here. Really excited to get this conversation underway. I think maybe some brief introductions are in order. Taka, why don't you take it away? Tell our audience who you are, what you do in this area of cloud computing.
Sure, happy to. And it's great to be with the audience this morning. My name is Taka Ariga. I represent the Government Accountability Office as its first Chief Data Scientist, but I also have the pleasure of being the director of its newest innovation lab. And really, it's our desire to prototype a number of emerging capabilities so that GAO can perform its oversight, insight, and foresight function better, whether it's through AI, through blockchain, through cloud services. So very excited to be here this morning.
We are excited to have you. Rick, how about you? Take it away.
Sure. I'm the Deputy CIO for the Department of Labor. I know it's introduced as the CIO, so I definitely don't want that position. But I've been at the Department of Labor for over 30 years in different positions, spent a lot of time at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is a subcomponent of DOL, and have been in this position for the last 2 years. And my scope is pretty much everything operations, from infrastructure to service desk to mission systems that the agencies use to perform their mission. Happy to be here.
You're the first person who I've given a promotion to that rejected, Rick. Thank you for that. Thanks for the correction. Major, tell us a little bit about the work you do for the Air Force.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I am one of the engineers that works across various flying missions that overlap with National Guard Bureau, ACC, and various Air Force programs. And we're really focused on how we use content to push to the edge of all these different flying missions with worldwide impact. So that's kind of our foray into the cloud for the most part, is making sure that we can get the products into the hands of the people that need them wherever they are in the most opportune way for the government.
Well, I'd like to really get into the meat of our conversation with the role that cloud adoption has played in your agency's digital transformation. Taka, because you sit at sort of a unique spot in government where you get to kind of look into a bunch of different agencies, I'll come to you last here, but Rick, why don't you take us through a little bit of your organization's cloud adoption journey?
Sure. I mean, we've been moving to the cloud over the last several years, so it's not a new endeavor, but it's a progressive endeavor, I guess I'll say. And it's really taken advantage of the cloud's ability to scale and to more quickly implement solutions. Back in time, we still have the data centers, but scaling up hardware, acquiring maybe services or software, it's a time-consuming process. So the cloud really provides us that ability to scale quickly, to acquire services that we need to implement into business applications quickly, and to then deploy that quickly out to the public to kind of meet the mission needs. And so a lot of it's been targeted at mission systems, especially public-facing mission systems. But now we're more progressing even into the typical virtual desktop capabilities that the cloud can scale up and provide more easily than building out the traditional ways you may have done in a data center.
Major, Air Force is considered, a leader in this arena, a leader in emerging technology. Probably wasn't always that way, but take us a little bit through your cloud adoption journey as well. How did you sort of get the organization to where it is right now? And I'm not giving you all the credit, just part of the credit.
Sure, and it's actually, it's a very nebulous question, and it's really hard to answer in core. But I think one of the best things that the Air Force has started to embrace is leveraging FedRAMP in a better way, and willingness to accept that software as a service is also an option. I mean, we come from a world where we've built everything we needed because our mission was so unique. But now we're in a place where, between remote work and the rest of the world's dynamic changing, that software as a service products fit our unique mission in a really important way. So really, I think there's a greater growing, I can't speak wholly for a lot of the infrastructure projects for the most part, but the SaaS type offerings for very rudimentary cloud content is something that we could just use and pay for. So it's a buy versus build methodology that we're starting to embrace for certain kinds of areas.
Taka, as you look across all of government, what stands out from the remarks so far? Common, to a lot of different agencies, and you're welcome to sort of put your innovation cap on here, that part of your portfolio.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question, George. And certainly from a GAO perspective, we have a fairly unique mandate in terms of oversight, having all across different corners of the federal government. So when it comes to cloud, I think there's certainly, to what Rick and Brian have talked about, an infrastructural element, whether that's resiliency, whether that's scaling, whether that's sort of, if you do it correctly, some cost driver that can be pushed. But as we started to see the proliferation of these modernization journey, what accompanies that is also issues such as the federal data strategy and many of the artificial intelligence mandates that have come online that are generating sort of proliferating volumes of information that agency like GAO needs to be able to intake and then turn those into oversight products. So from a cloud perspective, there's a lot of conversations around not only the accessibility of the information, but also the governance of that information as they come in and to agencies such as GAO. And then the third piece, I'll just add, what cloud has enabled us to do is that horizontal collaboration, whether it's a data pipeline, whether that's more of an agile-based coordination, whether it is really making some of the basic functions like data ingest and data exploratory process much more sort of integrated but easier to apply. And that's something that has been sort of game changing for us relative to beyond just the infrastructural and the sort of data storage elements of cloud, but how do we then enable those capabilities in a way that really drives our mission?
Rick, you mentioned the time-consuming process in your earlier remarks, and I'm curious, what are some of the most time-consuming parts, maybe challenges or hurdles around that? What do you face on a daily basis that's time-consuming?
Well, I mean, it's, those who have managed data centers for a long time, right? You've got just the basic facility of the data center itself, right? And we've actually moved to a commercial data center, so that's a little bit more taken care for us than when it was a data center, was in a government building that we had to maintain cooling and those sorts of things. But then you move on to the typical things of life cycle refresh of equipment, right? You have to buy equipment, you have to scale that equipment up to meet your business needs. Then you have the continuous process of life cycle refresh. So there's extensive and detailed budget planning. There's the acquisition of that equipment. There's the setup of that equipment. It's just a repetitive cycle. But even things in the advantages of the cloud of just being able to acquire that technical service. Let's say it's a database service, right? You just need a database service such as an Oracle or a MySQL or a similar type of service. On premise, you're going to go through a whole setup and licensing process to get that in place. Whereas in the cloud, you can pretty much just acquire that database service for your mission application need pretty seamlessly and easily and build that into your system. So, I mean, those are some of the examples. It's just there's a lot to do to manage a data center and to maintain it, and offloading some of that, by just consuming those capabilities through a cloud service really helps to streamline and speed things up.
Major, is there a connection between what Rick outlines there, the equipment life cycle and the challenges that sort of come with that, and the software as a service products focus that you were talking about earlier?
Absolutely. I mean, it's on its face, it's certainly exactly that. What he described is that everlasting cycle of renewal. There's a security element to that, which is really probably our most exhausted resource. There's not enough information assurance professionals in the DoD to do all those accreditation things. And every time you do a tech refresh, you're looking at new hardware, new supply chain, all these vectors of possible issues, and you're building that into a replacement cycle. So with SaaS, you're absolutely right. It's a direct correlation to paying that problem away to somebody who already has a repetitive approval cycle. And to be honest with you, that's something that we're buying from them as well. Their FedRAMP professionals, their third-party auditing is something we're offloading as a capital expenditure to the SaaS provider.
Taka, as an observer of FedRAMP and its maturation process over the past several years, what do you think agencies should be focused on right now as they work with a broad vendor community in this area of software as a service?
Yeah, I mean, I think FedRAMP has definitely been a game-changing sort of implementation relative to the discussions of security. But from my perspective, that is only the initial steps. FedRAMP a lot of time are mistakenly equated to ATO, which authority operate process, which are still very much agency specific. And many times I've had experience of talking about cloud journey where folks don't necessarily factor into that post-FedRAMP, what does that ATO process might look like. And another issue that we generally run into is not necessarily adopting a cloud journey for the sake of doing it, but if you don't actually take a cloud optimized approach to what the major has talked about, software as a service, but in many of the other managed services that Rick talked about, if you're simply taking sort of that lift and shift approach, you may not necessarily realize the kind of benefits that you were anticipating. So a cloud journey, it's not just a matter of adopting a different set of infrastructure. There's certainly complexity around the technology and the configuration aspects of it, but a sort of strong cultural element as well. On an on-prem environment, our folks never have to turn on the light switch, right? I mean, that infrastructure is always there. You can leave your workloads running, you cannot turn things off, you can sort of infinitely start shoving data sets into a supposedly unlimited set of storage devices. But with cloud, because of the consumption model, now we really need to train people to remember to turn off those services because we're paying for what we use, which is I think a cost driver that we can sort of leverage, but only if there's a sort of proper process and governance around the use of those services. So from my perspective, cloud, the benefits of cloud can only be realized if we actually take the care to reimagine that cloud-based sort of experience should look like.
Yeah, it's a great point. And there's a real sense of urgency of late too. I'm going to pivot a bit to telework. The shift to it happened rapidly, in many cases overnight. I feel like compared to 18 months ago, agencies have a bit of a stronger footing today. Rick, what have you learned about collaboration during the past year and a half? Have you even had, the time as things were just sort of boom, 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 boom for 18 months? Have you had the time to really examine what you've learned?
Yeah, we've reflected on that a bit, and collaboration has dramatically changed in the last year and a half. Traditionally, the traditional government model is to cram everybody into a conference room, right? You have people around the table, people around the sides of the room. That whole model went away a year and a half, and and move to online capabilities, using Zoom, Teams, different capabilities that are out there. And it really changed, I think, how people interact with each other, I think, in a positive way. Um, you know, Especially with folks that are always remote, like field staff or people in regional offices, and that regional national interaction was always difficult. Um, in this method of online collaboration, it kind of puts everybody on equal footing, whether you're sitting at the table or you were sitting, to the side in the past, or you were on on the other end of a conference line, which was always difficult to hear what was going on and to kind of interject. So, I think it's really had a dramatic change in how we collaborate and communicate with each other that I really don't see going back to how it used to be. At some point, some folks will congregate in conference rooms, but I think it's going to be more of this type of interaction going forward, in terms of how people meet and communicate with each other, and share and information kind of more online, and co-editing things and that sort of collaboration, rather than, again, let's collaborate and I'll mark up my printed copy and you'll mark up yours and we'll talk about the difference. That's kind of all gone to the wayside. And probably the biggest change there, I would say, is really in how managers work and operate, who were probably more paper oriented and more in-person meeting oriented. That's probably been the biggest adjustment, and that's probably a good thing, I think, overall.
Taka, I think Rick makes some great points on culture. There's no head of the table on Zoom. Everybody's window is exactly the same size. I mean, you can't really underestimate something like that. Can you talk a little bit more about culture and maybe the workforce's willingness to adapt?
Yeah, no, happy to. And GAO has been fortunate enough that even prior to the pandemic, we have a fairly liberal teleworking process. So, in some respect, we were ready for the sort of 100% telework posture that everyone adopted to. But that being said, there are still a set of basic function that we had to achieve. So, for example, all of our training overnight had to be online. We needed to make sure that our VTC capacity, had to be there. And even after a year and a half, we still struggle to find a mute button, right? It's always part of those virtual conversations where you need to remind people to turn on their camera and unmute themselves. Digital whiteboard, network capacity, application resiliency. I think the list goes on, just in terms of a basic function of having a 100% telework workforce that an agency had to adapt to. Another example is we adjusted our official working hour to include weekends as well. So what does that mean relative to availability of the help desk, relative to the security operations center for monitoring those potential incidents? I think that became something that, overnight really added to the plates of various our IT function. But beyond that, right, as we got acclimated to sort of a new normal, if you will, we started to really reimagine what this post-pandemic scenario might look like. Likely, we will end up with a hybrid scenario where folks may want to further enjoy their telework flexibility. We may end with a set of folks that really want to come back and have that in-person experience. So to Rick's point, how do we provide that equity at the table so that when we say conversation is not just a flat screen TV on the wall, where you can really sort of enable that immersive and collaboration experience. And so, but also beyond that, from a GAO perspective, we're also thinking about still, given the Delta variants, right, the travel scenario is still relatively in flux. So how do we apply technology such as augmented reality to really support site visits? So instead of sending 20 people, maybe we can send one person, but still have that kind of connectivity back to the headquarters or the field office for us to be able to do our oversight work. And I know the Air Force has done tremendous work around using of AR and VR technology to support training. But this is an area of, while the pandemic have accelerated a lot of sort of digital services for us to support the basic function of agency. But I think many of the organizations are now starting to think about the post-pandemic reality of how do we take advantage of that acceleration to really think about a much more of a hybrid but equally immersive experience that we can deliver to various parts of the agencies.
Major, like any good panelist discussion, Taka has sort of set you up for a wonderful question here. I don't know if you have visibility into AR and VR training, but the larger question that I have around this is, how has this shift to telework impacted, ability to deliver on mission? People use the phrase the tip of the spear. I mean, it's really important to be able to do that in the Air Force and a lot of government agencies. I mean, lives are on the line. So what do you think this shift has done for ability to deliver on mission?
That's a great question, and thanks very much, Taka. That's an important perspective to it, to maintain, our mission readiness. But I like to find the optimistic points and all the negatives when possible. But we had a series of, for instance, anecdotally, natural disasters here in Omaha long before the pandemic. A year and 2 years before that, we had 2 situations where we lost about 30% of our sitting space in offices and went rapidly mobile. And one of the best things to come from that, when there's no real positive to highlight, is that we were able to fail forward. We were able to highlight issues with the way we do identity on mobile, the way that we do mobile issuing, the way that we put devices into the hands of people as fast as humanly possible. So we got a little bit of a pandemic jump on that. VR and AR as we started to come back to the office, but it actually highlighted in the best possible way that with VR and AR content comes the content delivery issue. So we're able to leverage things like software as a service, using some of the API driven stuff from Box in order to actually distribute that content, because in a lot of ways, it's kind of sensitive or mostly sensitive a lot of the times, but this made it accessible from a FedRAMP approved source on an application we developed. And it was thin. It was something we could put out at the edge at a person's device and allow them to offload that to the SaaS provider.
If you're just joining us, I am here with Taka Ariga, Government Accountability Office. He's their Chief Data Scientist. Rick Krager, Deputy Chief Information Officer at the Department of Labor, and Major Brian Allibone, Director of Innovation for the 55th Wing of the U.S. Air Force. I'd like to start talking a little bit about the exponential growth of data and data collection. Taka, give me your sense, since you sit at this intersection of kind of all of government and IT. How has government done generally in managing that sort of explosion of data? It's attributable to emerging technologies, the kind of growth of sensors across government. Where is government right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the federal data strategy has done a lot of work in making sure that data capture through various missions of federal agency are now being made accessible. And certainly with the establishment of chief data officers across the board has really sort of streamlined that collaboration between a CIO function and a CDO function to be much more synergistic. I think where we're viewing as a sort of next frontier is beyond the question of accessibility of the data, is also the governance of that information. So answering the question of whether the data being made available is of quality, is complete, and can actually support higher functions such as machine learning development. So we don't want to end up developing AI solution based on information that may not necessarily have the right provenance or sort of assurance around the reliability. You end up creating sort of garbage in and garbage out conversation. And so relative to GAO, because we have this pan-governmental purview, right, we certainly have a lot of sensitivities around the security and the scalability of our analytic infrastructure. And that ranges from the way that we intake data in terms of how we store data, all the way to how we process that information. And cloud has really sort of provided that seamless sort of tapestry of whether it's infrastructure as a code, whether it's many other cloud services that we've been applying to really make that process a lot more manageable with a lot less resources. But less obvious part of what cloud has enabled us to do is also establishing those pipeline and automations and different type of consumption modality, right? I mean, the major talked about delivering AR and VR training content. From a GAO perspective, we certainly issue a lot of oversight reports. And so beyond just a PDF version of that document, how do we enable maybe a more visualization-centric approach to talking about pandemic vaccine, type of issue? How do we, instead of issuing a PDF report, can we do a simulation tools that talks about pros and cons of various policy recommendations that GAO may be issuing? And so those are the kind of more of a digital native, digital centric modality that has allowed us to adapt the complexity of the issues that we're addressing to the way that the general public, our stakeholders, which is the Congress, wants to consume that information.
At the Department of Labor, Rick, how has the cloud evolved to meet that challenge that Taka outlines here? This, automation challenge, this visualization challenge, this, let's generate some actionable insights for leadership inside the agency.
Yeah, I mean, this is a complex topic, right? So part of it is dealing with the volume of data, right? Having the capabilities, the data is constantly growing to kind of be able to manage that volume of data. And then it's putting that data to use, right? And that could be for management purposes, for planning purposes. It could be for the mission purposes itself. So for example, with say OSHA or MSHA, frequent violators of safety regulations, as being an example, should maybe gain more attention than those employers that are very careful about safety at workplaces. So it's definitely a volume issue. Then it's being able to have the capabilities to obtain what you need out of the data for your management and mission purposes. So to that end, DOL was awarded a technology modernization fund amount recently to build out its data analytics capabilities to better support that and to bring data from across the department together. Because the other challenge that you typically have is that business units typically stovepipe their data. You may know that the data exists through data inventories, but to truly bring it together and make use of it is another challenge. And then you do get into the challenges of data governance and data standards, right? You'll start to see those sorts of things crawl out of the woodwork then that truly haven't been addressed that you'll have to tackle. So it's really a challenge on multiple fronts. It's something that we're focused on. I would have to, even myself, I spent over a couple decades at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is a federal data consumption and publishing agency. That's what they're focused on, similar to the Census Bureau. I would say we're still kind of early in the life cycle of how to truly get expert at data management and publishing and using it for mission use. I think that's kind of the honest assessment there.
Major, when you're a director of innovation, what data points are you most interested in? I mean, what do you pull most often to either analyze for yourself or present to leadership? What are you looking at most closely?
Well, that's a hard to answer question because it depends on the question they're bringing. There's different types of data. And really, I find myself in two scenarios. I'm sure Taka sympathizes with this very much, because we have static documents that are shared drive quality, office technology kind of things. And then we have data-driven database, RESTful API type data types. And very rarely do they meet in the middle. And so what we're actually trying to, or what we've been successful in really recently, is finding a way to incorporate both of them through like a SaaS-based platform, metadata tagging, or automated classifiers that go within documents and find things which drive our security as well. I'm not saying it just because there's a GAO guy on the line, but every panel member here on the government side has an obligation for retention as well. So I mean, that's the other thing that I want to make sure I can find the answer for the people who want it, but I need to make sure I'm retaining the data for a sample size large enough to even find it. Nothing really helps us if we have a year's worth of data at one time only, and someone wants to know a 3-year spread. So it's kind of a nebulous question and answer, unfortunately, but yeah, I think in the time that we're in and the technologies that are available to us in the cloud for the first time ever, we're able to label security, or we're able to automatically classify things in a way we never could before. We're able to make relationships between data that was hidden and stored in the virtual desk drawer, if you will.
No, I love it. Taka, let's go philosophical, I guess, for a little while here. I think part of what the major is outlining here is kind of finding the right balance between, keeping stuff around, cutting stuff loose. I think there's a kind of risk management versus effective collaboration aspect to that too. How do agencies find or strike that right balance? They want to avoid data exposure, but they want to enjoy the benefits of this kind of single centralized data repository that has everything in it that they would ever need whenever they want to sort of dig into it.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'll maybe give an example use case, right? So when it comes to legislative branch, there's GAO, there's Congressional Research Office, there's Congressional Budget Office, and then from an oversight community perspective, there are a number of IGs that really sort of form that sort of oversight community. So there's always that desire on any given topic, whether it's pandemic relief, whether it's telecom, whether it's fraud, waste, and abuse. Wouldn't be nice if there's a way for somebody to type into Google and then the outputs are all of the work that GAO has done, all of the work that IGs have done, all of the work that CRS and CBO have done on the same topic. So this is where that horizontal cutting and mining of the data, I think, has certainly a valuable use case. Now, data sharing has been something that is, I think, perennially sort of challenged the federal government. But I think more and more where the data, federal data strategy is going is how do we sort of lower that barrier? And many of the, I think, AI specific mandates that have come out of the Hill are sort of mandating that data are now, in a way that is, I think the language is like computer readable. But what that really means is that, whether it's Department of Education or Air Force or Department of Labor data, that there is a consistency of that metadata tagging and provenance and sort of trust behind it. And then the third piece of here, now that we're talking about trust, something that's relatively recent evolution is the idea of equity and biasing, right? It's one thing to make data available, it's one thing to make data well governed, but it's another conversation to say, or have we actually scrutinized our own data to make sure that it is appropriately representing the constituents in which that data is meant to serve? So whether there are implicit or explicit bias, I think that's part of the conversation as well. And it's always a challenge between wanting to make as much data available as possible versus maybe some of the more of a risk management approach to say make it least available as possible, depending on who you talk to. I think there is a right balance to be struck here, whether that is through some sort of standardized retention policy, whether that is, maybe elevating the role of something like National Archive. I mean, their job is really to consolidate all of the federal government's data, right? And so, from GAO perspective, our standard retention policy is 7 years. So that's sort of, our guiding start in terms of how we look to generate horizontal mining of information based on that time period. Now, of course, fact and circumstances may differ depending on the use case. But generally speaking, we try to, I think, more and more err on the side of, instead of just episodic and one-off use of data assets, I think it's increasingly a much sort of higher value proposition to be able to horizontally mine those information so that there's an additional layer of depth, there's an additional layer of breadth to the kind of questions that we're all looking for answers.
Give me just a little more context, Taka, around horizontal mining. I haven't really heard that phrase applied to data before, and I'd love to learn just a little bit more.
Yeah, no, yeah. So I think AI is a good example of that, right? When we talk about training, certainly a large set of data sets is available, but if you have a data set that have a very specific, singular perspective, you always end up introducing the risk of, model drift or overfitting of those particular model. So, there are a number of topics. For example, I talked about the sort of like almost like a federal Google. If you're searching for any given topic, be able to sort of get output from various agencies. But also maybe on the topic of improper payments, right? This is something that every agency struggle with. So from an improper payments mitigation perspective, let's say if we're talking about use of identity verification, is there a way for, for example, Rick's organization to be able to share credential with the majors organization so that we're not just adopting this silo approach of my agency, my data, my credential, but if we're able to sort of mine that horizontally, maybe we can cover the kind of schemes that are beyond our individual agencies' operating boundaries. So I think there's a lot of starting use case to say, how do we go across sort of agencies to be able to sort of harmonize similar types of data to really address what we call grand challenges like improper payments, like many other sort of I think persistent issue that have plagued the federal government.
Rick,
and I think cybersecurity is one issue of that, right? I mean, the recent EO has talked about how agency and including private sectors need to share more of the incidents, attack vector, et cetera. So that necessarily would have to operate outside of the agency boundaries as well.
Absolutely. Rick, let me pull on two threads that Taka sort of laid out there. And just jump in if I'm way off base here, but from where you sit and the Department of Labor's role in government generally, I would imagine that horizontal mining that he lays out has an equity and bias aspect to it that labor is keenly paying attention to. Am I reading that right?
I feel like it's my full-time job these days, actually, that particular topic, especially in the area of unemployment insurance, where we you see plenty of news articles and OIG reports regarding fraud. And we know that there's a big emphasis on equity to make sure that people that are qualified are getting those benefits in a timely manner, regardless of their situation or demographics. So it's a heavy focus of ours right now.
Well, let's talk a little bit about legacy systems. I'd love to maybe go around the horn and hear a success story, an opportunity that you may have had to just cut a legacy system loose and what you replaced it with, how it's impacted operations. Major, if I could, I'd love to put you on the spot here first.
Oh, no problem. We have plenty of legacy systems, so there's plenty of stories to tell about it. But I mean, most importantly, we have the ultimate legacy system. We've transformed several paper processes. We're talking like a flight evaluation folder is one of those examples, and it has your entire history of flight from when you began training to the day you decide to leave the Air Force or retire. When we had our great flood of 2018, 2019, a lot of people lost their paper folder, and we had to struggle with how do we transform the processes that went into that to become an all digital one and follow you. And so now we have this folder of record for the rest of your career that follows you wherever you go. That's the other thing, like you used to take your paper folder with you. So that's the ultimate legacy product in my opinion, and now we're totally digital. But also because we digitized it in a way where there's a database involved, where there's metadata and tagging involved, it's not just PDF stored in a folder to replicate a folder. We can actually get information that's stored in there as well when we really need to get questions from it.
What about you, Rick? Anything that you've offloaded recently that you were really proud of doing so?
Yeah, I think every federal agency has lots of modernization going on. I mean, there's a few examples. So one that we frequently point to is the Department of Labor is responsible for foreign labor certification, so to bring foreign labor into the U.S. for various purposes. Could be for technology support or for crop harvesting or landscaping services, or many reasons. So that comes through the Department of Labor, those applications from employers to bring in foreign labor for that purpose. So that was a heavy paper-based process, typical of many government processes of the past, right? That was completely put online, and we eliminated all paper, thankfully, prior to the pandemic. That fully went into effect, where we were completely out of the paper business there. But obviously getting out of the paper business streamlines the whole process, right? The handling of that paper, how quickly you can review and process those applications, et cetera. But it also streamlined, there's interaction between federal agencies to accomplish that. So between the Department of Labor, we obviously have to communicate with immigration on that particular topic to make sure that approval for that purpose flows through all the government's processes, not just at the Department of Labor, but it affects also agriculture and immigration. So it streamlines it across government, not just at one agency, where we see benefits like that. DOL also has a major function to review court filings and appeals from individuals regarding labor issues with their employers. That was also, when you get into court filings, there's always plenty of heavy paper involved, right? Briefings and things that the lawyers on both sides may write up. And that was a heavy paper-based process and has been moved onto completely online filings. And then I guess the important impact of doing those sorts of things, I'll just mention, since it was mentioned earlier, ultimately a lot of this stuff has to flow over to NARA, right? And NARA's kind of set deadlines to say, we're only taking stuff electronically. So it helps to, these types of modernizations, especially to get out of paper, helps to meet that larger government objective of sending stuff to archives in a electronic format as well.
Yeah, that's a great point around 2022. So Taka's agencies look to replicate the successes that Rick and the major outlined here. They have a new, influx of cash in the form of this Technology Modernization Fund, TMF. Generally speaking, where should agencies be focusing those funds on? Are there specific areas of IT that you think is the low-hanging fruit, something that really reaps major benefits in comparison to other areas?
Yeah, I'll give maybe a somewhat of a counterintuitive answer. Before anybody spends a dime of whether it is Technology Modernization Fund or any other funding resources, I would say take some time to really articulate what is the architecture of your cloud journey should look like. Are you adopting a lift to shift, or do you really want to go cloud optimized? And more importantly, go talk to folks like Rick who have done the work before, so that you're not reinventing those lessons learned. That's one thing that I observed, that many federal agencies are loath to talk about failure. That F word is such a dirty word in the public sector. But there are many common sort of mistakes that organization tends to repeat because they're not having these type of knowledge sharing. I'm certainly happy to talk about our particular cloud journey focusing on analytics modernization. I'm sure Rick has wealth of stories on what has worked, what hasn't worked. We can give in, how do we accomplish our respective ATOs? As a matter of fact, GAO is working through the concept of ATO in a day. I think as we continue to move in the direction of infrastructure as a service and a lot of automation, I think ATO in a day is absolutely possible if we just put sort of resources behind to realize that vision. So that's maybe where I would begin. And I've certainly have seen my fair share of modernization where people go out there procuring a cloud contract, but not necessarily structured in a way that could meet the ultimate vision. So, the road to modernization, that graveyard is littered with examples of failed acquisitions. So I would actually suggest before a single dime is expended, really to put some thought process around what is that sort of vision of end state look like, but also think about what that interim journey will look like. So I'll give an example. We are in the process of migrating our on-prem analytics computational environment into a cloud-based platform. And we have a very sacrosanct ethos that we have to follow, which is do no harm. The ongoing oversight mission of GAO just cannot be disrupted. And so it's not a matter of shutting down one system and turning on another one. There are many instances that we need to really carefully figure out workloads, data, pipeline, application. How do we move them? When do we move them? And in what manner do we move them so that we are maintaining that continuity of service, but also be able to acclimate user in a new consumption-based model that, there's certainly, I think, user experience, user interface challenges that we need to work through. There's training issues that we need to work through. So that transition period, I think, is equally as important than what kind of cloud infrastructure, what kind of platform, what kind of software as a service you end up procuring. Because if you don't have that grounding, right, this is an area that you probably don't want to trial and error and to figure it out. There's a lot of folks that, the Major and the Rick as well have done work around this that I think we'd be more than happy to share our battle scars, but also, success stories.
Well, we shared a few today. Taka, Rick, Major, I've really enjoyed the conversation. Learned a lot today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to our audience for tuning in to this special program, Embracing the Future of Work with Content Cloud. If you missed part of the show or you want to share it with another Cloud Pro, the on-demand program will be available shortly. I'm GovExec's George Jackson. We'll see you next time.